The journey to the promised land. Joshua's trust in God. Long ago, after the Israelites had wandered in the wilderness for 40 years, God chose a new leader to guide his people into the land he had promised to their ancestors. This leader was Joshua, a brave and faithful servant of God. The Israelites had been through much, and their journey had not been easy. They had faced hardships, hunger, thirst, and battles. But through it all, God had been with them, providing for their needs and guiding them with a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. Now, standing on the edge of the promised land, the people looked to Joshua for direction. Joshua knew that leading the people into the land of Canaan would be a great challenge. The land was filled with strong cities and powerful kings who would not easily give up their territories. But Joshua also knew that God had promised this land to the Israelites, and he trusted that God would be with them just as he had been with Moses. One evening, as Joshua stood on a hill overlooking the Jordan River, he prayed. "Lord," he said, "you have brought us to this place, just as you promised. Please give me the wisdom and courage to lead your people. I trust in your power and your promise." As Joshua prayed, he felt a deep peace settle over him, and in his heart, he heard God's voice. "Be strong and courageous, Joshua. Do not be afraid or discouraged, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go." These words filled Joshua with confidence, and he knew that with God on their side, the Israelites could overcome any obstacle. He returned to the camp and began to prepare the people for the crossing of the Jordan River. The next morning, Joshua gathered the people together. "Get ready," he told them, "for tomorrow the Lord will do amazing things among you." The Israelites did as Joshua commanded, and early the next morning they set out for the Jordan River. As they approached the water, Joshua gave instructions to the priests who carry the Ark of the Covenant, the sacred chest that represents God's presence among them. "Take the ark and go ahead of the people," Joshua said. "As soon as the soles of your feet touch the water, the flow of the river will be cut off, and the water will stand up in a heap." The priests obeyed Joshua's command and began to carry the ark toward the river. The Jordan was at a flood stage, overflowing its banks, but the priests stepped into the water with faith. As soon as their feet touched the water's edge, a miracle happened. The water from upstream stopped flowing and piled up in a heap, while the water downstream flowed away, leaving dry ground in the middle of the river. The priests stood in the middle of the Jordan with the Ark of the Covenant, and the entire nation of Israel crossed over on dry ground. The people were amazed at what God had done, and their hearts were filled with awe and gratitude. They knew that God was with them, just as He had been with Moses, and that He would keep His promises. Once all the people had crossed, Joshua chose 12 men, one from each tribe, and instructed them to take 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan where the priests stood. These stones were to be a memorial, a reminder of the day when God had stopped the waters of the Jordan so that His people could cross over into the promised land. The 12 men did as Joshua commanded, and they carried the stones to the place where they would camp that night. There, Joshua set up the stones as a lasting memorial. In the future, Joshua said, when your children ask, "What do these stones mean?" tell them that the Lord your God stopped the flow of the Jordan so that we could cross over. These stones will be a sign among you forever. That night, the Israelites camped at a place called Gilgal, just east of Jericho. The memory of the crossing was fresh in their minds, and they knew that God was with them as they prepared to take possession of the land. As the people settled into their tents, Joshua walked among them, offering words of encouragement and reminding them of God's faithfulness. The people were filled with hope and anticipation for what lay ahead, knowing that God's promises were being fulfilled before their eyes. But Joshua knew the journey was not over. The city of Jericho, with its high walls and strong defenses, stood in their way. Yet, Joshua was not afraid. He trusted in God's plan and knew that God would give them the victory. The next morning, as the sun began to rise, Joshua went out to survey the city of Jericho. As he approached, he saw a man standing before him with a drawn sword in his hand. Joshua went up to him and asked, "Are you for us or for our enemies?" "Neither," the man replied, "but as commander of the army of the Lord, I have now come." Joshua fell face down on the ground in reverence and asked, "What message does my Lord have for his servant?" The commander of the Lord's army replied, "Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy." Joshua did as he was told, and there on the holy ground, the Lord gave Joshua instructions on how to take the city of Jericho. It was not by conventional means or through the strength of arms, but by following God's unusual command. For 6 days, the Israelites were to march around the city once each day, with the priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant and 7 priests blowing trumpets made of ram's horns. But on the 7th day, they were to march around the city 7 times, and then the priests would give a long blast on the trumpets. When the people heard the sound of the trumpets, they were to shout with a great shout, and the walls of the city would collapse. Joshua relayed God's instructions to the people, and though the plan seemed unusual, they obeyed without question. For 6 days they marched around Jericho, with the priests blowing the trumpets and the people remaining silent. On the 7th day, they rose at dawn and began their march. They circled the city 7 times, but on the 7th time, as the priests blew their trumpets, Joshua commanded the people to shout. The people shouted with all their might, and at that moment, the walls of Jericho collapsed, just as God had promised. The Israelites charged into the city and took it, as God had given them the victory. That day, Joshua and the Israelites saw the power of God firsthand. They knew that it was not by their own strength, but by the hand of God that they had overcome their enemies. The victory at Jericho was the beginning of many triumphs as the Israelites took possession of the land God had promised them. As the night fell once more, Joshua returned to his tent. The camp was quiet, and the people were at rest, knowing that God was with them. Joshua lay down to sleep, his heart filled with peace and gratitude. He knew that the journey was far from over, but he also knew that with God's guidance, they would overcome every challenge. And so, under the watchful eye of the Lord, Joshua and the Israelites continued their journey, step by step, trusting in God's promises and following His lead. As you drift off to sleep tonight, remember Joshua's courage and faith. No matter what challenges you face, God is with you, guiding you and giving you strength. Trust in His promises, for He is faithful and His love for you is unchanging. Good night, and may God's peace be with you.